The Storm, Part 1. It began with the storm. A supercell the size of a small nation rose over the American Midwest just after 3 a.m, blooming out of a clear sky like a black tower. No fronts, no moisture, no meteorological pathway for it to exist. Radar operators watched it form in real time, a perfect vertical column, rotating without drift, without lightning, without rain. At 3:12 a.m, the lightning began. At 3:13, the ground shook across 5 states. At 3:14, the storm collapsed inward and something else took its place. Where the storm had been, a flawless, mathematically precise dome nearly 1,000 miles across, now sat on the continent, a perfect globe of shimmering static, fog and distortion. Everything inside was obscured beneath a uniform veil of interference. No terrain, no cities, no lights, no movement. Just a continent-sized blur, as if the land had been overwritten. It had formed in seconds. Commercial flights diverted, interstates shut down, the FAA grounded half the country. By dawn, the United States had mobilised the largest domestic response in its history. Troops established a perimeter at checkpoints around its vast circumference. Satellites were retasked, drones were launched, none returned. Their feeds dissolved into white noise the instant they touched the haze. Animals refused to approach. Birds diverted mid-flight, even insects veered away. Attempts to dig under it revealed the dome was actually a sphere. A National Guard unit attempted a tethered probe. The cable crossed the haze, vibrated once, and then the inner portion simply wasn't there anymore. The outer length, the part still in normal air, remained intact, clean and undamaged. The cut was surgical. No scorch marks, no fraying, no mechanical stress, just a perfect, impossible termination. The probe was gone. A volunteer, a firefighter from Kansas, stepped forward with a rope tied around his waist. He walked into the distortion. The rope went taut, then slack. Then the inner section ceased to exist, leaving the outside portion dangling from the hands of the men holding it. The end was smooth, almost polished, as if the missing length had never been manufactured. He did not return. Scientists examined the rope end under microscopes. They found nothing. No heat damage, no chemical change, no mechanical failure, just absence. More attempts followed. Drones, cameras, sensors. Electronic devices could touch the haze and retreat without harm, but once fully into it, they were not seen again. No amount of tugging on the rope could drag back whatever had entered it. Perhaps mechanical devices fried instantly. No one knew for sure. Very soon after entry, the tether would snap. Within days, the pool of willing volunteers dried up. The government issued a call for special volunteers. A handful came, older veterans, terminally ill ex-soldiers, people with diagnoses that had already taken their futures from them. They were briefed, thanked, and sent into the haze one by one. Each rope ended the same way. Each volunteer vanished without trace. None returned. After the 7th, the program was quietly ended. No more volunteers, no more attempts, no more people sent inside. For a month, the sphere remained unchanged. Then the impacts began. Small at first, a crack in a concrete barrier, a scorch mark in the dirt. Then larger, flickering, unstable masses of static or maybe plasma burst from the haze at ground level, striking the earth with enough force to crater soil and buckle metal. Some rolled, some bounced, some simply dropped and burned where they landed. Every one of them was lethal. A soldier in Nebraska reached toward one before the cordon was established. The air snapped with a burst of white noise and he collapsed instantly. Medics recorded electrical trauma. No one touched one again. A 200-foot exclusion zone was established around every impact site. The objects continued to fizzle, pop, spit arcs of energy, burn into the ground, distort the air, fluctuate in brightness. They did not cool, they did not decay, they did not become safe. Drones sent to inspect them lost power within seconds. Remote tools failed. Water cannons turned to steam before reaching the objects. Scientists could only observe from afar. No samples were collected, no readings were reliable, no conclusions could be drawn. Theories multiplied anyway. Some said the objects were being thrown from inside. Others said the sphere was shedding pieces of itself. Others insisted they were static pulses, electromagnetic knots collapsing into matter. None of it could be proven. By the end of the 2nd month, the entire circumference of the sphere was surrounded by a half-mile no-go zone, marked by fencing, floodlights, and warning signs that said only, "Do not approach, energetic hazard, keep back." No one knew what was happening inside. No one could get close enough to learn. the sphere remained silent, opaque, impenetrable. The world stared at the static fog dome, waiting for an explanation that would never come. The Storm, Part 2. America had just learned to adjust to the static shrapnel when a new, deadlier incident occurred. A small town in Texas had been truncated by the sphere. Its edge had frozen Main Street in two, houses on one side swallowed by shimmering interference, houses on the other side untouched. Floodlights and fencing turned the boundary into a spectacle. At night, people still gathered, locals, journalists, soldiers, families who refused to go home. They stood behind temporary barriers, watching the static fog dome breathe in the dark. Just after 1 a.m, the haze bulged. At first it looked like a pressure wave, a slow outward swell in the interference. Then a large dense mass of static and light pushed through, forcing its way out of the barrier and into the open air. It did not fall, it stepped. The thing moved like a person trying to walk in a room where the lights were flickering on and off. Its outline jittered, its edges breaking into noise and reforming. Sparks crawled over its surface, leaping to the asphalt in snapping arcs. Streetlights above it blew out one by one as it passed beneath them. For a few seconds no one moved. It didn't look human, it didn't look like anything. It kept coming. It walked along the street seemingly blind, disoriented, veering, lurching. Every few steps it blipped, vanishing for a heartbeat, reappearing a few meters away, as if reality had skipped a frame. The crowd broke. Some ran, some filmed, some shouted for it to stop, as if it could hear. A cluster of onlookers had gathered near a side street, pressed against the fencing for a better view. The entity flickered, vanished, and reappeared inside the crowd. What followed was not a battle, it was an erasure. People dropped where they stood, bodies failing in ways no one could process in the moment. Electric bursts flung charred bodies into the air. Some folks seemed to wither and die, as if years of their lives passed in seconds. Others staggered, clothes catching fire from stray arcs. Few who touched it survived, and many who did were never the same again. Vehicles died in place, windows blew inward, the air filled with the sound of screaming, alarms, and the distant crackle of unstable energy. Soldiers opened fire. Rounds warped, disintegrated, or veered off course before reaching the thing. Some struck buildings, some hit the pavement. None seemed to matter. The entity moved on, leaving a jagged path of collapse behind it. Streetlights bursting, shop fronts darkening, power lines sagging and failing. Blocks at a time lost electricity as it passed. Sirens cut out mid-wail. The town's grid flickered, then dropped entirely. For nearly 2 hours, it wandered along the streets at the boundary, sometimes half inside the haze, sometimes fully outside, always unstable. Every attempt to approach ended the same way. Equipment failed, vehicles stalled, and anyone too close was knocked down by invisible forces or sudden bursts of energy. On the edge of the chaos, a small team of technicians and one exhausted physicist worked over a cobbled-together device, a modified acoustic rig, tuned in desperation to a frequency they hoped would interact with whatever the thing was. When the entity staggered past their position, they triggered it. The sound wasn't loud so much as deep, a pressure in the bones more than in the ears. The entity convulsed, its flickering outline vibrated, splitting into overlapping silhouettes that tore at each other. The arcs of energy intensified, then folded inward. For a single impossible instant, the static cleared. Inside the distortion, they saw a human figure, a body, a face, features twisted in confusion, not rage. Then the form collapsed into a violent burst of light and scattered arcs that scorched the pavement and blew out what remained of the windows on the street. When the after images faded, nothing was left but burnt asphalt and the wreckage of cars and storefronts. By dawn, the official story was already written. The entity was described as non-human, origin unknown, hostile by nature. Footage showing the brief human outline was seized. Witnesses who insisted they had seen a man or a woman inside the static were quietly discredited, reassured, or ignored. But enough people had seen it. Enough had talked before their phones were taken. Enough fragments had escaped the blackout. Online, a word took hold. Returnees. Not officially, not in any briefing, but in comment threads, late-night radio, conspiracy forums, and whispered conversations in evacuation centres, the idea spread. Whatever was inside the sphere was finding ways to come back out. and it didn't end there. Over the following weeks, more shapes pushed through the barrier at scattered points along its edge, each one flickering, disoriented, and catastrophically dangerous. Resonance weapons were no longer prototypes, they were priorities. The improvised device from that night became a blueprint. Within weeks, armoured vehicles along the boundary carried mounted emitters. Portable units were issued to rapid response teams. Static shrouded shapes that emerged from the barrier were now met with calibrated resonance bursts that tore them apart before they could reach populated areas. The makeshift fences and ad hoc barricades of the early days were replaced with fortified walls, layered with sensors and lined with resonance arrays. The half-mile no-go zone became a hardened cordon, cleared of civilians, patrolled day and night. Theories multiplied. Some said it was a Soviet relic finally waking up. Others blamed a new weapon, a collider accident, a secret experiment gone wrong. Some called it a doorway to another dimension. Some called it hell. Some called it judgment. None of it could be proven. The only agreed upon facts were simple. The sphere remained. Things could come out, and when they did, they were deadly. The world learned a new word, even if the government never used it. Returnees. The Storm, Part 3. By late autumn, the world had learned to live with the dome. It loomed over the continent like a second horizon, a shimmering hemisphere of interference and silence. The walls around it were fortified, the resonance cannons were calibrated, the protocols were memorized. The returnees still appeared, but fewer now, and the world had adapted to the new normal. People stopped looking at it every day. They stopped asking why it was there. They stopped hoping it would go away. And then one morning, it began to shrink. No warning, no tremor, no sound, just a subtle inward pull, like the air itself was being drawn towards the centre. Sensors picked it up first, then the soldiers, then the civilians, then the world. The dome contracted, slowly at first, then faster still. Commanders shouted orders, scientists argued, cameras rolled, families fled, but nothing could stop it. The sphere collapsed inward at impossible speed, folding in on itself like a punctured lung. Everything inside remained intact, buildings, roads, towns, because the dome had never been physical. But every living thing inside passed through the static barrier wall during its implosion wave. Millions of people, millions of animals, birds and insects, entire ecosystems, all forced through the barrier at once, and the barrier did what it always did, it broke them. They emerged, unstable, flickering, blind, disoriented, static forms staggered across fields and highways, phase jumping unpredictably, shedding arcs of energy that killed streetlights and stalled vehicles. The defenders panicked. Resonance cannons fired in overlapping arcs, trying to contain the flood, but the weapons were never designed for this. Where hundreds or thousands of altered beings were hit at once, the resonance waves amplified, fed back, and detonated in catastrophic bursts of light. Shock waves rolled across the plains, farmland flattened, forests ignited, power grids collapsed, towns went dark, dust clouds rose for miles. It wasn't nuclear, it wasn't radioactive, but it was devastating. When the dust settled, there were survivors on both sides. Outside, soldiers, civilians, emergency crews, scattered towns that had been just far enough away. Inside, millions of people who lived far enough away from the static border. Then there was cattle, wildlife. Every living creature was altered, drifting through the ruins like blind ghosts. They did not eat, they did not sleep, they did not weaken, they did not die on their own. They wandered. Crackling cattle stampeded. Blind flocks of birds flew north and south, perhaps guided by instinct. Some phase jumped past the cordons and appeared miles away. Some hid in collapsed buildings, flickering in the dark. Containment became impossible. The military escalated. Aircraft deployed wide area resonance sweeps. Drones dropped resonance charges. Entire regions were vibrated clean. The cost was enormous. Farmland scorched, livestock lost, wildlife annihilated, ecosystems broken, towns evacuated permanently. The Midwest became a patchwork of dead zones, quarantine corridors, and flickering interference pockets. The infrastructure remained, buildings, roads, vehicles, but the land felt hollow, wrong, as if something essential had been scraped away. People called it the quiet zone. Footage leaked, faces were recognised, the truth spread. Every returnee had been a person. Every person inside the dome had become one. The world grieved, the world raged, the world feared the next eruption. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then on a winter night, far from the quiet zone, a storm formed over China. Not a normal storm, a vertical column, silent, rotating, impossible. And at its centre, a shimmer, a distortion, a familiar static haze. The world held its breath. The dome had not ended, it had moved. And whatever sickness the earth had caught was not finished with it yet.